Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Mon nom est Michel Caillouette. Je suis vice-président à la recherche et aux affaires académiques à l'IRCM. Il me fait grand plaisir de vous souhaiter la bienvenue à ce lancement de livre. My name is Michel Caillouette. I'm Vice President for Research and Academic Affairs at the Montreal Clinical Research Institute. And on behalf of the entire IRCM direction, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this official launch of the book, The Theory of Deliberative Wisdom, authored by our esteemed colleague, Dr. Racine. The IRCM has a long history of excellence in bioethics, starting with David Roy, I'm sure Eric will remember, who founded the Bioethics Center at the IRCM in 1976, which he led until 2008. And then to sort of prepare the transition and ensure continued excellence in bioethics, the IRCM recruited Eric Racine to lead the Pragmatic Health Ethics Research Unit. Eric is also a full research professor at the University of Montreal in the Department of Medicine and in the Department of Social and Preventive Medicine. And I think you will be more formally introduced by your colleague later, Eric. It's also my pleasure to introduce the president of today's session, Dr. Arthur Caplan. He's currently the Dr. William F. and Virginia Connolly Mitty Professor and founding head of the Division of Medical Ethics at NYU Grossman School of Medicine and also Department of Population Health in New York City. Dr. Caplan has a lot of accolades and many achievements. I'm just going to summarize a few. He's author or editors of 35 books and more than 880 papers in peer-reviewed journals. He served on numerous advisory committees, including the National Cancer Institute Biobanking Ethics Working Group. He chaired the advisory committee to the United Nations on human cloning. He also chaired the advisory committee on the Department of Health and Human Services on blood safety and availability. He served on the Presidential Advisory Committee on Gulf War illnesses, which must have been quite interesting, and Special Advisory Committee to the International Olympic Committee on Genetics and Gene Therapy. He is a regular commentator on bioethics and healthcare issues on various media in the US and internationally. He's recipient of many, many awards and honors. I'm just going to list a couple here to give you an example. He was named USA Today 2001 Person of the Year and was described as one of the top 10 most influential people in science by Discovery Magazine in 2008. He is one of the 10 most influential people in the ethics and biotechnology, named by the editors of Nature Biotechnology, one of the leading journals in biotechnology. He's also one of the 100 most influential people in biotechnology as nominated by Scientific American magazine. Dr. Caplan obviously received many, many awards and prizes, too many to tell you all, but recently he received the Patricia Price Brown Prize in Biomedical Ethics in 2016, the Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Society of Bioethics and the Humanities. And in 2022, he received the NYU Rory Mayers College of Nursing with its Humanitarian Award. And in 2024, he was named Mentor of the Year at NYU Grossman School of Medicine, Department of Population Health. He holds 8 honorary degrees from colleges, university, and medical schools across the world. And so as you can see, we're going to be in good hands today. He will lead this discussion, so I will let Dr. Caplan take over from now. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me okay? Good. And my mother thanks you for that very generous introduction. If she were still with us, she'd be super pleased to have heard that, although I doubt she could identify who we're talking about, having a different view of my achievements and life, perhaps, than that CV. In any event, it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce you to the book and Eric's work, as the book captures, but also some of the things he has underway, I hope we touch upon. We basically hope that you take away an understanding of what a novel and interesting approach he has been developing to thinking about practical affairs in ethics. Having spent my whole career trying to think about practical affairs in ethics, when he submitted his book project to the MIT bioethics series that I edit, I was extremely excited to read it, partly, as happens sometimes in peer review, because I agreed with it. And that usually is something that peer reviewers don't always confess. But I looked at the book manuscript and just thought, this is something that the field needs. It's a much better explication of how to approach practical problems in bioethics, but in ethics more generally. And we were thrilled in the MIT series to have a chance to publish it. So you're going to hear more about that in a minute, but happily it falls to me to say just a few more words about Eric before we get into a dialogue between he and me, and then we'll have some other comments from others, invited expert guests, and then a little Q&A with the audience to help us wrap up. So I'm just going to say I've known Eric for a long time, been a fan, independent of the book, for many, many years. I actually have to confess, I knew his predecessor too. When you get old enough, I knew Dr. Roy and was a fan of the work that McGill and he and the Institute were all doing. So real pleasure to see it flourishing under Eric. He directs what's called the Pragmatic Ethics Research Institute at the Institute. And he's also working in a network that I hope he tells us a little about on citizen knowledge in Quebec, where you try to engage the public in thinking through some of the tough bioethical challenges that are out there. He too is a national, international figure in bioethics. I know him from some of the work he's been doing in neuroethics over the years. I think he's the author of at least 250 peer-reviewed publications, books, and edited volumes. I think one of his volumes was Oxford University Press, a somewhat secondary and inferior outlet, no doubt, but to the MIT one. But okay, we'll accept that. And he has frequently guest lectured all over the world. I know he's on many editorial boards, lots and lots of advisory committees all over the world. And I know that he has also been on the board of directors of the International Neuroethics Society. So, inspired by his pragmatic interests, he produced this book. And I think what I'd like to do is, rather than go on about him, let's get into the book itself. So, Eric, if you can hear me okay, I have a kind of a simplistic question. What made you decide to write this book? Why now?
Well, just before answering, I want to just greet everyone and thank everyone for being there. Merci beaucoup d'être ici, amis, famille, collègues. So family members, friends, and colleagues, thanks for being here. Thanks, Michel and Art, for setting this up. And you have a great question. If I say to become rich, probably you won't believe me, right? It's not a good answer, writing books. Maybe not the best way to earn income. But let's not tell MIT Press this yet. Just joking. But I think there are probably three major reasons why I embarked on this project a number of years ago. I think there was an amount of dissatisfaction with the current status of ethics scholarship and theory. Some perspective on how we could reap scientific knowledge to go further, and some hope also. And I'll just unpack this a little bit. The dissatisfaction really came from the fact that we were doing a lot of empirical research and try to collaborate with stakeholders. And we had ethics theory on the one hand, and we were trying to do practical changes on the other hand. we didn't really have a bridge theory that gave us a vision of what we wanted to accomplish and why. And I felt like, there was something missing there, and that we needed to fill this gap to empower, especially the younger generation of researchers in ethics, to have a firmer, stronger scholarly vision of our field. Then comes in the second reason is because of the work that you mentioned, Art, in neuroethics and what I had learned from human psychology and neuroscience in my past research and graduate work actually on AI and ethics a long, long time ago. I got interested in cognitive science and AI at the very, very, very beginnings. And all of that made me think, wow, we have amazing bodies of knowledge in fields like cognitive science, psychology, and it seems sometimes like our ethics is rooted in 19th century like science and philosophy. And there's so much we could reap from paying more attention to what our colleagues in other fields know. Yet our ethics theories are often kind of single discipline, they're more philosophical and not really interdisciplinary. And then I guess maybe the most important reason is I felt like, a bit like medicine and other practical fields like engineering, we needed an orientation, a constructive orientation to bring about, a goal to use this knowledge. And that goal in the book is human flourishing. And I hope that it does provide a kind of constructive orientation to our work, and that ethics can actually be a lever for human flourishing and really, empower us, those involved formally in the field of ethics, but the users of ethics, to actually take away something very concretely from what we do and what we can do together.
I'm going to just follow up there with a question, something you raised. Do you think that understanding work in AI, neuroscience, cognitive science, I'll even extend it to evolutionary science, does that help us understand the kind of ethical outlook that human beings have? Are we partly guided by our biological past?
The one way I'll pick up this question is answering very straightly. I do think that all we can learn from human behavior and moral psychology is useful. Just like medicine doesn't stand shy from using knowledge from basic science, ethics needs basic knowledge of how things work. And if we want to have impact, if we want things to work, we need to understand, because knowledge is power. That's Francis Bacon actually said that. So there's no reason to think that ethics is different. If we want to bring about changes, we need to understand why things work, why things don't work also. So yeah, definitely.
All right, give us, if you would, I know the book is long and there are a number of arguments made there, but I'd like you to boil it down a little bit. If I said, what are 3 or 4 points that would help me understand what you mean by deliberative wisdom, what would you offer?
Yeah, great question. It's the book's title, so let's try to unpack this a little bit. Very succinctly, deliberative wisdom grasps a very simple idea. We can learn together by talking to each other and listening to each other to better flourish as human beings. That's the idea of deliberative wisdom. I'll try to explain it a bit more in a minute or two, but the idea of wisdom may give the impression that this is kind of pie in the sky, knowledge, and, it's for an elite aristocracy or whatever. But really, wisdom is the knowledge of how to use knowledge. Wisdom is different from mere intelligence. So Aristotle, for example, very ancient philosopher, distinguished, people who knew how the working of the universe, mechanisms guiding the stars and whatever, from people who actually could get things done and live their lives in a fulfilling way. And so wisdom is something different. It's a kind of practical knowledge. Now, ethical wisdom is really the practical and theoretical knowledge of how to live a good life. And that's something applicable to everyone. Everyone listening here today with us and participating is, I think, called upon to reflect on their own lives, on, what's guiding my life, what should be guiding my life, what's guiding me in this difficult situation, whatever, whether it's a professional situation, a very personal, intimate situation, whatever. So, ethical wisdom is this kind of practical knowledge of how to live flourishing lives. And in the book, I pull a lot from a model from an influential American psychologist, Carol Reif, which is a kind of a 6-pronged model of human flourishing. And she describes how, based on a lot of research, things like autonomy, self-acceptance, positive relationships with others are constitutive of most people's understanding of what a good life is. And there are other things like having a purpose in life and so on. Now, to boil it down to the book, and maybe the unique contribution I'm hoping of the book, is to argue that deliberative wisdom actually is a way of thinking about how we can learn from each other. And basically pulls from the idea that through dialogue, which is another Greek word standing from generated from logos, which means talking to each other to develop an understanding of things. That's why we have psychology and biology and so on. Dia means multiple people. So making sense of the world together. And in this case, making sense of what matters to us as human beings together, and acknowledging that our daily conversations are basically areas we can mine and pull from to better understand the impact of our own behaviors on other people, and to learn and insights about, what outcomes we have when we do, different things in our lives, So deliberative wisdom basically is this idea we can learn together about living good lives.
So let me warn you, I'm going to ask you in a second to give me a case to illustrate what you're talking about, but I want to sort of probe you on 2 other points. I think you've got a connection to the ancient Greeks. I think Socrates might agree the way to wisdom is to engage with others. He spent a good amount of time running around questioning people, asking them for their thoughts. In a sense, does that strike you as somewhat of the community engagement kind of a model? And I say that knowing that at the end of the day, they finally had enough of him and put him to death. But all right, still the idea I think he had, I've always been an admirer of. But would that illustrate the kind of thing you're talking about?
I think very much, although I'm hoping for a better fate than Socrates. And I mean, a commitment to truth, a commitment to learning from each other. The ancient Greeks did a distinction between heuristics and dialectics, which I find very, very useful. And heuristics is when we engage with each other, trying to convince of each other's, truth and values, trying to teach each other. Dialectics means trying to find the truth together. And so I think there's a very strong connection with the Socratic model of pulling from everyday conversations and questions which have relevance to us. A way that I could re-explain a little bit the purpose of this book is I felt that a lot of the teachings we have don't even apply to my own personal life. So, how could I use this scholarship to guide colleagues and others and fellow citizens in making sense of ethical problems when I can't really use the scholarship in my own personal life? So this this connection is also kind of a personal one with the theory and what I lay out in it.
Yeah, and I maybe it'll come up later. I happen to agree. Others might not. We'll see what some of our other commentators have to say in a little bit. I think you can get consensus on human flourishing. By the way, I think that was Aristotle's project, and we've supplemented it, as you pointed out, with improved understanding of our psychology, medicine has its ideas about health and what leads to flourishing for human beings and so on. So I do think there may be a way to root this community deliberative dialogue driving toward understanding flourishing. Not that everybody has to have precisely the same notion of flourishing, but if there's a range within a set of parameters, okay, I think that might be a way to think about practical ethical achievements. Okay, give us a case, illustrate, and then after that happens, I'm going to actually turn to our commentators and let them get into this discussion as well.
Yeah, no, let's try to bring this home a bit and see what it can look like in practice. And I'm going to describe, in a few words, the project that we undertook here at IRCM, my main institution of affiliation. So we started out with a problem that was kind of brought to us about the neglect of psychological distress for patients who have chronic illnesses. We have a clinic here which deals with patients who have, very complex chronic illnesses, complex forms of diabetes, of blood fat issues and so on. And those busy and highly specialized clinicians are dealing with patients who are sometimes very distressed with living years and decades with their conditions. So we proposed to undertake a living lab or living ethics lab where we kind of use the model of the book's logic, the inquiry-based model of ethics. And we started out by basically meeting patients and healthcare professionals to really understand first the experience of that moral problem. And all these ideas that I'm throwing out there are well detailed in the book. I hope they are. And then we engaged them in thinking about solutions. And we did another round of interviews and working groups to get people to, propose ideas. And then we developed these ideas into resources. We developed a new clinical management process where patients can report physical and psychological changes prior to their clinical appointments. We put together resources for healthcare professionals and patients and other things to support the initiative. Then we tested it out, just like the book actually proposes, to test these ideas out. And we evaluated the impact. And fortunately for us, the outcomes were really good. And actually, although we don't like forms, 80% of patients who completed this form want to use it on their next clinical appointment. Why? Because it's giving them control. It's empowering them. It's making them more autonomous. So this is an incremental step in tailoring services in ways that connect to people's well-being and flourishing, because they have more power and more say in their clinical meetings. And so that's an example. We have many other projects which are kind of falling on this kind of learning model of ethics that the theory of deliberative wisdom proposes, where we start from problem, generate solutions, and actually honestly try to evaluate, because that's something not only in ethics, but in many other fields, we don't do enough. We don't evaluate enough the outcomes of what we propose and what we try to accomplish. So I think that's a case. That's one case. We've had, that's a successful case. Some cases have been more challenging, but we are making progress in bringing about changes in different areas, rare diseases, ICU care, and so on. And this gives me hope that when we embark on such projects, we can actually make a difference when we're guided by ethics, because we pull from people's intrinsic motivation to do better, because that's what human flourishing is about, is what we deeply care for. And what do healthcare professionals deeply care for? Is taking well care of people. And if we kind of bring a conversation at that level with them in a really open-minded kind of way, we can unlock potential. And it's same thing for patients. They were extremely grateful in having this opportunity to participate to the changing care and actually experiencing the outcomes of that change. So it's one case. I'm hoping there'll be more. Yeah,
that's a great illustration, and I agree. Too often in bioethics, it's the internal coherence of the argument that is the measure of whether it's interesting or valid. For bioethics work as practical, it needs both application and evaluation. You've got to refine and learn from failure as well as satisfaction in the case of that instrument. But that's very exciting. I'll put in a mild plug here. Hopefully, this is getting you interested enough to go out and buy the book. Very much worth reading, and I think is going to be influential in how the future of bioethical thinking proceeds, particularly in, let's call it, clinical and practical settings. So that said, let me turn. Giulia, you out there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Giulia.
Hello.
Giulia is assistant professor in ethics, law, and medical humanities at Amsterdam University, where I have been, but I've never met Giulia. So welcome. Thank you for coming. And we're going to ask her and two other distinguished academics to offer some brief comments on the work as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So yeah, thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to share some thoughts about this book. So I think this book is both important and timely. And I'm going to start this brief commentary quoting John Dewey. So John Dewey reminds us that ethics begins when something needs to be done. And today there's so much that needs to be done. There are many morally problematic situations in our world as we face many issues that raise questions about the meaning of life, which we heard about just now. And now I'm thinking about, among other things, the climate crisis, threats to freedom of speech, and ongoing wars, obviously. And these crises have deep ethical dimensions that shape both individual and collective well-being. And they raise questions that we cannot ignore and that we cannot answer alone. And this is key. So this book reminds us that ethical reflection is never a solitary endeavor. Ethics begins in the recognition that we must reflect together in dialogue. And dialogue has already been referred to. So, and now I make it a bit personal. So reading this book, for me, it feels a little bit like coming home. Because as somebody who has long used Dewey's ideas as tools to foster ethical reflection in many different contexts, I see this work as powerful, but also a new addition to that toolbox. Because it highlights that ethical reflection is essential to the good life, but not just any type of reflection. What we need is collective, open, responsive ways of engaging in reflection. So we need a kind of reflection that helps us identify possibility for learning, but most of all for moral growth, which, quoting Dewey again, is the only moral end. So the book emphasizes the functional and democratic nature of ethics, and it situates ethical wisdom as a form of knowledge, one that enables both individuals and communities to identify, but also, as Eric just said, to evaluate courses of action in light of their potential to foster that moral growth that I was talking about before. And this is a non-authoritarian, participatory vision of ethical wisdom. And that's what we desperately need now, I think. So Professor Racine offers this book as a tool. And like all tools, I hope it is used, tested, and most of all, connected to the experience of its readers. And in good pragmatist fashion, I wish it a long life, one that grows, evolves, and is continually refined through democratic and deliberative processes, as all good tools should be. Thank you so much for having, and congratulations on this book.
Thank you so very much. Dr. Dasgupta, are you out there?
Hello.
Hi. So let me see if I pronounce this right. Jayashree
Yes, that's right.
is adjunct professor in health management at the Chitkara University in Punjab, India. What the heck time? Oh, are you at the Atlantic Institute today, though? She's also a
No.
fellow at the Atlantic Institute in Oxford. I was hoping you weren't up at 2 a.m. to join us, but maybe not too bad. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Arthur. Thank you so much, Eric, for an opportunity to be, part of your book launch and share a couple of thoughts, because I've always admired your scholarship. And, when I read the Theory of Deliberative Wisdom, it was just brilliant to see the pragmatic approach to ethics. I'm someone who works in India and at the intersection of ethics, aging, and public health. And so naturally, that was the lens through which I was reading the book. And there was, it was what really resonated with me a lot were the chapters where you've actually explored the barriers, to moral awareness and the scenario-based ethical deliberation. And I thought this really resonated a lot because it made me reflect about the work that I'm doing. And often one of the things that I see is that many morally charged situations around, say, for example, dementia, which is, dismissed as being normal aging, or gendered burdens of care, they're often rendered invisible, or they're normalized through cultural norms or societal, hierarchies. And all of this kind of contributes to this sort of quiet, moral blindness in a lot of ways. And I just thought it was very powerful that, the way that you put it across, that this theory doesn't just stop at identifying these barriers, but you also introduced gateways, ways in which you could open up ethical awareness. And I thought that was incredibly powerful and, a strength of the book, which, you've actually given these tools, about how we can, work towards this sort of collective awakening to challenge and address some of these things. And then I thought that, in the chapter on scenario-based ethical deliberation, the fact that you've focused so much on moving from awareness to action was, again, very powerful. And the emphasis on ethical imagination through, co-constructing scenarios with stakeholders and grounded deliberation in lived experience, which is, the core of all participatory work. I thought that was very, very, important, and I think that those methods that you've elucidated so well are really helpful for the readers. So I think, there's a lot of ways in which I think the book is going to be a very, a piece that could be applied globally, and I think how to understand, how we kind of use or implement these gateways, in deliberative scenarios in maybe under-resourced settings or culturally diverse settings, with challenges of, low literacy or power imbalances, might be interesting to pursue. But I think there's immense opportunity for a lot of, empirical work on this further. And I think that that's what's really very exciting and valuable about your book and your entire work. So it really gives us that conceptual foundation and a way to actually cultivate ethical, imagination and flourishing in the spaces where it's needed the most. So thank you so much for your work, and many congratulations on the book. And thank you so much for an opportunity to share a couple of reflections today with you all.
Thank you. Very, very astute comments. Thank you very much. The last invited commentator, I do know, Walter Glannon is Professor Emeritus now at the University of Calgary. And he and I have known each other for a long time. Before I turn the floor over to Walter for his comments, let me alert the audience. We're going to follow Walter's remarks with some Q&A from the audience. And I think, if I'm right, you can use the Q&A tool to put questions to Eric. Particularly do that if the question is in French, because my tourism French wouldn't get me far in translating what's going on unless you were going to ask me for what's on the menu or how to find the post office. So use the Q&A. Eric, I think you're watching there too. I'll try to keep an eye on the Q&A as well. So we'll be going into that more open question session right after we hear from the very distinguished Professor Walter Glannon.
Thanks for that nice invitation, Art, and to Eric for inviting me. it's an impressively wide-ranging book about the normative dimensions of human behavior, and distinctive in the way it explicitly, sometimes implicitly, combines Aristotle's concept of phronesis with Dewey's pragmatism, and providing a framework for understanding and responding to issues as they arise in different situations, different contexts. And this goes to some of the remarks Art made when he, in his introduction. It goes beyond the typical book on ethics or morality as a set of rules that prescribe how we should act in different situations, or even as a toolbox of principles about how to resolve conflicts in clinical settings. The open-ended deliberative process that it lays out is more about collective interaction than isolated action of individuals. And this idea of flourishing is really interesting because, as Aristotle would say, it's not so much something that consciously drives our behavior, but rather something that emerges from open-ended deliberation, cooperation as part of that process. And this was mentioned earlier too. Unlike the fixed rules that one is supposed to follow in ethical theories, the deliberative process, one of the original things, interesting things about it, is it allows for moral imagination or ethical imagination in our encounters with others. And that's the basis for empathy and critical for cooperation and recognizing what the ethical issues are and how we can resolve them in ways that respect the interests of all parties or all stakeholders, as Eric would say. So it's hard to condense this in 2 to 3 minutes, but one particularly attractive feature of the book, and this is from my work as a philosopher, is the discussion of the intersection of ethics and what Eric calls the scientific study of morality. This is pages 126 to 129. Eric rightly emphasizes that the process of open-ended deliberation is multidisciplinary. It's not just philosophy, not just psychology, but anthropology, sociology, political science. All of these disciplines contribute to this open-ended dialogue. And empirical methods, quantitative, qualitative studies, for example, in behavioral psychology or other social sciences, can complement and inform philosophical debate on the normative aspects of individual action and social interaction. And I think one of the shortcomings in philosophical ethics is to ignore what empirical research can provide in informing the way we frame questions and discuss them. So I could say many more positive things about this book, but we should all thank Eric for writing such a richly textured account of how we can deliberate, act, and live in ways that promote the collective good. Thank you, Eric, and congratulations on the book.
Well,
Thank you so
Walter
much.
and colleagues. Thank you.
So Eric, if you look to the Q&A, I'm seeing a couple of questions there in French, which I'm going to ask you to go after first. Let me encourage others in French or English to use the Q&A for comment or question at this point.
So we have a question up asking if the book will be available in French. Interestingly. And I must say, I don't know if ever this will be the case. Usually decisions to translate books and publish work lies in the editors. So MIT Press will have to make kind of a decision to see if this is something they want to do. Obviously, MIT Press is a business, and so they have to decide if there's enough of a market to do this. But many people have been asking me this question, and I guess this is something I will bring up to the managing editors and maybe to you, Art, and others managing the series. Yeah.
You know, just so people know, these days with books, there used to be a bigger market for translations. AI has done many things, but it has ruined somewhat that market because people feed it into translators, and maybe it's not 100% perfect, but they tend to start to do that more. So it makes it harder to get an accurate, precise translation out and published. I wouldn't say impossible. And here's another odd fact for French speakers and English speakers. The biggest market to go to is China and Japan. I've even seen Korean used before I've seen European languages. So I'm going to bet you're going to see this book in Chinese before you see it anywhere else.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, a publisher will approach from China and ask MIT, could we get the rights and do the translation? So that's in the spirit of practical deliberative wisdom. That's an answer about book translation, how it goes. Other questions? I'm looking here, see if others have a comment or a question. I have one while they're waiting, Eric. So I was generous before. I said, you know, people, I think, can come to an agreement over time about human flourishing. But let's push that. There are a lot of diverse communities. Let's just look at the US, completely politicized, often now acting as if it lived in two worlds, a very libertarian, almost populist, somewhat hyper eugenicist, genetically driven outlook about human behavior and flourishing among one community, and another community that is seen more as open to concern for others, worrying about the impact of action and behavior on the community, thinking hard about justice, what's fair to the least well off. So there are these two communities, and when they deliberate, they certainly don't have common meetings much anymore. They sort of threaten each other periodically at this point, but they're not chit-chatting amicably at some, town hall or coffee shop or something. Can we really bridge? I mean, I'm granting that there are dialogues that can take place across some pretty broad communities, but are community boundaries such that the model won't really have legs, given the divisions that might be out there culturally or historically, or even for reasons of bias and bigotry?
I think it's a really great question and was always on the back of my mind when I was writing this book, the culture wars, especially in the US, but now this is becoming an international phenomenon. For everyone living, not in Canada or the US, this is...
Right, we love to export our horrible ideas, but yeah, go ahead.
And good ones too, Art, good ones too. But I mean, another way to frame this is, do we have a future if we cannot talk to each other anymore across different communities? Because you mentioned the distinctive communities, plural. The issue is recognizing that we belong to a single community, which is, the human species, and acknowledging that there are things that tie us together. And that's what we're losing sight of, and becoming so divisive that we see ourselves as being part of, completely separated communities. What we need to create is community between people. Now, the way to create community, one way, is to create common interests. Now, to discover a common interest, we need to actually discover them and create them. That's where the theory would say, common interests are not a given. We need to find them. We need to find how we will agree to what Giulia mentioned, like ecological crises, for example, that we're all experiencing everywhere in the world. How are we going to deal with this? And if we cannot talk to each other anymore, and we cannot imagine a future together, do we then have a future as human beings? We are a talkative, intelligent species, not fully intelligent, to be honest, but we have some intelligence. So how do we use it together to discover what we can share together and what we can learn from each other? So the theory gives a justification and an aspiration for why, trying to talk to each other and kind of dismantling the barriers that are becoming stauncher and stauncher between communities, between people, is so necessary. Because basically, if we don't have any common interests anymore together, I think we're in big trouble, to say it politely. And I think what we're seeing in the US is not reassuring in that respect, and that what we're experiencing in other countries. We need to work on creating dialogues. And maybe there are ways where we kind of disentangle the kind of the process of learning from each other from the process of deciding what to do. And we're maybe sometimes so stuck, so urgently thinking about, the thing we need to do and agree upon to act, that we kind of don't give ourselves the time and space to have that kind of breathing room, to explore what, underlies our views about different matters. So creating community, I think, is a contribution potentially of deliberative wisdom. And now we have many questions lined up. Art, maybe
Okay.
look at them.
You're seeing more than I am, so
Okay. So I can read them out loud.
Yeah.
Question is where we can purchase this book. Actually, the great question.
You have to come to my house.
Yeah, good. You can purchase the book through MIT Press, but also through Amazon for Canadians, for example, Chapters Indigo. So I think it's available in many, many places. If you look online to your favorite library, or you probably can order it through your own physical local library also. So another question from Erica Monteferrante from Montreal. She's asking, how would you vouch for deliberative wisdom and ethical imagination when faced with people who aren't open to your approach? Yeah, it's a great question. I think this is something we need to try out. How do we unlock people who kind of are not in a position to open up and learn from each other, to get them, talking to each other? I think we can learn from our colleagues in clinical ethics, for example, who deal with difficult healthcare situations, on how they mediate between very contrasting, kind of opposed perspectives. How do you kind of at least get people to recognize that other people's concerns and values and points of views have some merit, right? Enough merit to kind of listen to them, even though you may not agree in the end. So I think learning how to do this, setting the stage for some kind of common ground where we are all co-learners about our own lives and about human flourishing. And although you may profoundly disagree with someone, there's perhaps something you can learn from that person about how to live your own life and think about, what matters to you. So I think the kind of shifting the paradigm from what I describe as heuristics to dialectics, from advocating your own perspective to actually being in a mode of co-searching for the truth with other people. So kind of budging people to change their orientation and open up to some extent. Obviously, if people, don't want to talk to each other, then, we're in a difficult situation, obviously.
So I have another question, by the way, for our visitors. Giulia, Jayashree, Walter, if you want to jump in after I ask this, feel free. If you have another question, audience, keep coming. For some reason, I'm not seeing things in the Q&A. Eric, please keep an eyeball over there. But here's a different question for you. How do we make sure that we hear from voices in deliberative wisdom who are hard to hear, the disabled, or children who don't really have a voice per se, but obviously we want to take stock. Future generations aren't here. We want to wonder a little bit about what they would say about climate or pollution or other matters like that. So in thinking about dialogue in the community, there are many poor people who may have a hard time getting heard or showing up literally at the town hall and adding their perspective in. How do you think about making sure that, I'll call it, the adequacy of the community is satisfied?
So is the question to all of us, Art?
Well, I'll take you.
First. Yeah. I think, voice and interests are two separate things. But they're hard to separate out, and we have to be careful about separating people's interests from their actual ability to voice their interests and concerns. Too many times people's interests have been ill represented, and people have, in disability studies and so on, have pointed this out numerous times. So I think the paradigm of voice is could be expanded, where people can voice interest in other ways, more creative ways, more unusual ways than speech. So opening up to listen to what people have to say in different kinds of ways. So obviously we listen to our ears, but we also can see things, we can feel things.
Do you think AI has a role there for soliciting views?
Potentially people could be using AI to express things which they have a hard time expressing themselves. So that's a great point. I mean, we also have to be careful about not underestimating, for example, children's abilities to understand research and contribute. So I've been involved in participatory research with children, and it's also amazing. Don't underestimate what youths and children can bring to the table. Let's give people a chance. And if they have, difficulty, or if the process is not adapted to them, maybe we can adapt it to include ways, for example, with children or people with disabilities, to communicate. But this is something that really, we've done research on people with cerebral palsy, for example, have been constantly dismissed as not being able to communicate. And it's a very frustrating situation for people to have interest and not having a voice. So, but we need to use the technologies we have, which in our studies have shown actually help our healthcare providers, dismiss the technology also. They don't take time to use it. So important issue. We need to argue and make it clear that this is really important. People's voices need to be represented and their interests. And voice is not only speech.
Could I say something? Okay, just following up on Art's point. So yeah, the question is, how do we enable access to dialogue from these groups, children to disabled, elderly? How do we use technologies like AI and others to enable that access in a way that's going to respect them, their dignity, them as individuals, but at the same time ensuring that they have a voice in discussing these issues?
Can I also add
Sure.
something to this? Yeah, so I think it is important, if we are creating these spaces for dialogue, that we shape these spaces according to the needs of the people that are going to sit in those spaces, so that we don't project on them what are their needs and what do they need to access that space, but together with them, we build that space. So to avoid creating spaces that we think are inclusive, where actually we don't know what inclusivity means to those people. So I think that's also important, adding to what was already said.
Yeah, I worry, particularly in a lot of the international issues, there are so many people who have no voice, never get heard, are disempowered. They could be people in a refugee camp, they could be people just in a super poor country. I do think maybe that's a next step in thinking through the deliberative wisdom theory, to try and figure out, well, how can we capture, particularly for international issues, these voices that, I will just say it flat out, never get heard in most settings. They just don't. Well, let me do this. I'm going to give Eric, watching the time here, a chance to offer some final comments. I doubt he will, at this point, withdraw his theory, but I think the dialogue has been great. Good questions, great comments. It shows you the power, actually, of what he's trying to do, and I think we'll be working on and refining and illustrating and hopefully disseminating further. But I'll give you the last word. I just want to say thank you to everyone who came to the event. There are no obstacles online to buying this book, so you can find it. Don't worry about that. And I think it'll be worth a read. It's not a bad gift to a medical student or a nursing student or a philosophy student. This is an audience that I think would be appreciative as well. So, and thank you for having me participate. It was a real pleasure to do so. So, Eric, I'm going to let you conclude the event.
Well, let me just thank everyone for being here, for being generous with their time and engaging in this discussion and taking the time to learn about the content of a new book and a new theory. I hope it's going to stimulate discussion and encourage you to go further than what I've been able to do. Hopefully there may be a couple of things people take away from this work. I'm hoping people will see ethics as some kind of powerful technology, something that actually empowers people to make practical changes for the better. I think that should be our aspiration in ethics. We should try to make concrete changes and learn from them, and I hope the book provides a structure to do this. And maybe a second takeaway is I hope that this book basically depicts ethics as something beautiful. That the idea that our own lives is something we own, something we can decide upon, that we can guide, is a beautiful idea for ourselves and for our fellow human beings and citizens. I love to cite Eleanor Roosevelt, who said, "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." And I hope ethics, at least in the way I try to advance it, is a process where we beautify our dreams. We make them more inclusive. We make them deeper and more interesting and more engaging to engage in life and, take away all that we can from our experience and our lives as human beings. So, yeah, hopefully this gives everyone hope. Ethics can bring about changes, but also ethics is something inspiring and beautiful, and we should take our opportunities, the ones we have, to exchange on these kinds of problems we call moral problems, ethical problems, to learn from each other and learn about life.
Thank you so much. What a great ending. Thank you, everybody.